So a while ago, there was a loading screen that the game had added that is still in circulation, specifically this one. Now, this loading screen in particular kind of made me hate myself for a small period of time. And the reason is, well, when I looked at the character on the right, I thought it was Shokaku. The pin in the hair and the coat's design kind of screamed that to me at first. What I didn't pay attention to was how the eyes were done. And that is something that is a unique feature of the Crane sisters, so yes. I didn't realize this was Enterprise. Which brings me to you. Are you really Tirpitz, or are you just Enterprise with a fancy skin? Akashi, I swear to God, if you're trying to pull a fast one on me, I will find out. Alright, jokes aside, today we're looking into another German ship, and this is our lovely little Queen of the North, Tirpitz. Tirpitz is obtainable during the Divergent Chessboard event, an event that featured several Ironblood ships, so hopefully it returns soon for those that missed it. Tirpitz is one of the Ironblood's battleships that are available to us, and is also one of the Ironblood's very few SRs. Is Tirpitz really the glorious German engineering that we want her to be, or does she fail to live up to that meme? Now that I think about it, is it really a bad thing to fail to live up to a meme? Well, I guess we should at least see how she fares then. Diving into her stats, we see some interesting things. First and foremost, her health pool is terrifyingly high for someone who is a level 100 character. This combined with heavy armor will allow her to tank some serious damage. Definitely a character to consider for backline flagship if you want someone who can take a beating. Of course, this assumes that you don't have a character that has a strong frontal barrage or needs the flagship spot for whatever reason. Typical for most backliners, her evasion is low, but thanks to her health pool, she'll be able to handle the damage better than a lot. Lastly, her anti-air isn't really that great. She's on the lower end, so I guess this means that she'll be taking a lot more damage in terms of air attacks. On the more aggressive side of things, Tirpitz has a slightly higher than average firepower, so she's capable of hitting pretty hard. She's also one of the few backline members that has a torpedo stat, but since she does use it differently, we'll cover it in a bit later. Her reload isn't the worst, but she's towards the bottom end of that stat, meaning that she'll be one of the last to fire unless you boost reload in some way. Efficiency-wise, she's kinda in an interesting place, I guess. Her main BB gun is 5% lower than most ships, but that difference isn't a major concern for Tirpitz here, and we'll go into that a bit later on. Her light cruiser destroyer gun secondary is at the average efficiency, so she really doesn't stand out there either. Lastly, her anti-air efficiency is 10% lower than most ships. This already doesn't pair well with her low anti-air stat, and that continues to push her weakness towards air attacks. Stat-wise, she's got a few things going for her in her favor. Her high health pool and decent firepower stat will help her in fights. Now, if we were to look at her at level 120, we can see that her stats do jump more, and they're evenly distributed. Her health and firepower alone at this point makes her a pretty considerable character to use based on the neutral game that she does have. However, there's more to her than simply just her stats, so let's take a look and see how she fares when we take her skills into account. Tirpitz's first skill is Lone Queen of the North. This skill is a self-buff that increases her overall damage output by up to 30%. Now this is a damage buff, not a firepower buff, so she is going to hurt even more with her attacks. Pairing this with her known stats, it sounds like she's already a pretty good pick. Well, there is one downside to this skill, and it could be a considerable one depending on the person. This skill activates if and only if she is not with another battleship or battleship cruiser. In other words, this skill forces a fleet restriction on you if you want her to be at her best. Now, one can argue that this isn't really as terrible as it sounds, and, well, there's a few reasons. As many of you know, her sister ship Bismarck exists and has a skill that directly trumps this particular skill, and actually in some ways can improve it if you've got it leveled. Another thing to consider is that you can use aviation battleships like Hyuga, Ise, Yamashiro, and Fuso, and really not be penalized for using them. Outside of these exceptions, you'll have to stick with the carrier or repair ship to avoid losing this powerful buff. One last thing I do want to mention about this skill is that it can activate at any time. I have seen a few PvP scenarios where a battleship besides Tirpitz sinks, leaving her by her lonesome, and this procs Lone Queen of the North. You know, now that I think about it, this creates like a weird like plan B synergy with Bismarck. I mean, in the unlikely possibility that Bismarck isn't flagship and somehow manages to sink, well, Tirpitz can just apply her own buff back onto her and pretty much be where she was with Bismarck. It's kind of a weird thing now that I think about it. Anyway, her second skill is Magnetic Torpedoes, which allows her to launch 4 torpedoes at least every 10 seconds. This extra source of damage may not hurt as much as other torpedo-based characters, but hey, free damage. Can't really complain, right? One thing I will mention is that the damage of the torpedoes is influenced by 2 particular things, the skill's level, as well as the torpedo stat. I guess there's also the, weapon modifiers that should be accounted for, so consider those as well. One thing I've noticed is that unlike Amagi's tight spread torpedoes, these torpedoes fan out. This pattern can cause them to detonate at the edges early if she's at the top or bottom positions in the backline. In some ways, it feels like this skill was designed with her being flagship in mind. I mean, you can lose a torpedo or 2 due to her position when she's not flagship. I guess if you want Loyalists' fleets and you don't have Bismarck, then you could put her in that flagship position. Overall, Tirpitz has a lot of good things working for her now that we've considered her skills. Her high health pool and good damage output allow her to be a considerable threat to enemies in combat. Her firepower stat is complemented by a nasty damage buff skill, but just note that she doesn't like to share the battlefield with any other battleship. Okay, except her sister and aviation battleships. Now, she does have a weakness to air-based attacks, as I've already mentioned a few times, but hey, we all know someone that we, well, know and love. Okay, fine. We maybe not love, but anyway, we have San Diego if we need help with anti-air. Lastly is the question of, is she a mob fleet backliner or a boss fleet backliner? Well, in my opinion, that kind of depends on how you like to build your fleets. Unless you have Bismarck, your biggest concern is going to be Tirpitz's Lone Queen of the North skill. Since this skill forces no battleships outside of her, you'll only have one character for last line defense. This can be troublesome for certain bosses since they might have a pain train as part of their fight mechanics. You could offset this with a strong vanguard, or heck, you could just say screw it and use a battleship, but just note that if you use another battleship with Tirpitz, you significantly weaken her. Again, unless it's Bismarck or aviation battleships. Her torpedoes aren't likely to hit the boss. Magnetic is a bit slow, and it also can be a little bit unreliable, considering how weird they can act. You can at least expect them to hit some mobs and mob fleets. Regardless of all of this, she still has a pretty decent neutral game and can hit pretty hard and also take a pretty good beating before she actually sinks. So, which fleet type she's in really depends on how you like to build your mob and boss fleets. Now, Tirpitz is a lone wolf character and doesn't really seem to have any major synergies outside the kind of weird exception I mentioned earlier with Bismarck. Well, maybe it's not weird. I guess they are sisters after all. I guess you could count Zeppelin's buff, which does make her a bit tanky, but other than that, she's got nothing noteworthy with any other ships. In conclusion, Tirpitz is an interesting character that just seems to prefer to work alone. Her skill is a nice benefit for those who aren't too big on battleships, but first off, you might want to get used to having some battleships because late game you're going to need them. Of course, some people will also not like this because, well, it does restrict the fleet composition a bit. However, the introduction of Bismarck does mitigate this issue and puts a bit less strain on fleet composition. If you're running her solo, she'll hit hard and be able to take a beating or 2. If you're running her with Bismarck, well, she'll still hit hard and you get the added advantage of having another defender in your backline. After considering everything about her, I don't think she fails to live up to the glorious German engineering meme. I mean, you guys all see the health pool. So, take that as a nice plus, am I right? Alright, that'll be all for Tirpitz. Hope you enjoyed this video and that it will help you in your future endeavors. As usual, the list is shown on screen now. If you have a ship girl that I've not covered and also is not on the list, then let me know in the comments below. I'll get to them soon. You might have noticed something was up with that list. All I'm going to say is that look forward to her video very soon. Now, whether you're a regular viewer or patron supporting the channel on Patreon, thanks for watching and I will see all you guys again very soon.